So most of us think that fighting is bad for romantic relationships, right? How many people do you know who say, hey, I had a great fight the other day? Oh, yeah, my partner and I fight all the time and we're super happy.
52 years ago, we put love under the microscope. Julie and I are the founders of the Gottman Institute and the Love Lab. And we've made the study of relationships our life's work. And our research tells us that fighting is good for relationships, not bad.
In our lab, we saw that almost all couples fight. In fact, how they fight in the first 3 minutes predicts with 96% accuracy not only how the rest of the conversation will go, but how the rest of the relationship will go 6 years down the road. My God, I know. It's terrifying, isn't it? So it's not if we fight that determines relationship success. It's how we fight.
In fact, our research has revealed that some fighting actually increases connection and even improves our sex life. So how do we fight right?
Hi there. I'm Dr. Julie Gottman.
And I'm Dr. John Gottman.
So you mentioned in your TED Talk that a large percentage of conflict is actually never resolved, right? 69%. I'm curious, Julie, how, when we are having a conflict that we're not going to find a solution, what does the end of that conflict look like? What's a healthy end to a conflict that can't have a solution?
A temporary compromise. That's what works best. So a problem like messiness versus neatness is going to come up over and over and over again. What do you know? We have that one. So,
or introversion versus extroversion, right?
Right, yeah. right. So what typically happens in the way to do it right is you go to a deeper understanding place by asking each other questions that really draw out underlying themes, underlying dreams, underlying background history, maybe, that are part of each person's position on the issue. So there's deeper understanding, hopefully a little more compassion, and then you arrive at a temporary compromise. Just a little bit of compromise.
And John, between the two of you, who is the messy one and who's the neater one?
Yes.
Okay. So how
messy in the sense that I'm constantly reading books, and then the pile grows and grows wherever I happen to read.
And the pile grows right next to the side of the bed. So eventually our temporary compromise is after 4 weeks or so, I will say to John, sweetie, I'm going to break my neck if I try and make the bed. Will you please move your books?
Right.
And then he does. And then it starts over again.
I think that for a lot of people in long-term relationships, when you hit something that is like this, where you have a pattern of being and it keeps happening over and over, a lot of times people make this narrative in their head that this is like a huge problem and that if you can't solve it forever, then that is maybe a deal breaker when it shouldn't necessarily be. How do you address that with people?
Well, what we always say to people is that, look, you are in a different body than me. You have a different brain than me. So there are inevitably going to be personality differences and lifestyle differences that erupt into conflict every now and then. So it's okay as long as you learn how to talk about it. And talk about it calmly, gently, without tearing each other apart. You know, Chris, a lot of people want to marry their clone. However, if they did, they would be bored out of their minds. Who wants to, talk to your mirror all day, right? Yeah. So, as a result, those differences can really enrich the relationship. They don't deter from it.
Well, for example, there was a master couple in the study that Bob Levinson and I did, a 20-year longitudinal study. And this couple was amazing. He was attracted to her because he was really introverted, and she was kind of the life of the party. They were in this black church together, and, she would invite everybody from the church over every Sunday. And really irritated him. So the very thing that attracted him to her became a source of irritation. And for her, she was attracted to the fact that he was a quiet and thoughtful, steady and loyal person. Somebody she could really, he was like the rock, and she described him that way. And then she noticed that when he became tense about anything, he really withdrew. And she hated that. And so she'd say, talk to me. And say, everything's all right. Don't worry about it. I've got it under control. Yeah, but what are you feeling? And he'd just be quiet. And that would really irritate her. So often the very source that attracts people then becomes, point of irritation. So these two people talked about this, and she said, okay, so what are all your feelings about this issue? She said in the lab. And he started to laugh because he doesn't do feelings. So she said, no, really, I wanted to tell you that I really appreciated the drive we took and this weekend to that park. And he said, you're welcome. She said, it was very thoughtful of you to take me on that drive, but you were so quiet. What were you thinking about? And he says, well, I can't pay the insurance this month. If you really want to know what I'm feeling. And she said, well, I'm glad you didn't tell me during the ride. It would have spoiled the whole thing. But I need you to talk to me about things like that. Well, what good would it do? She said, well, I've got my own money. He said, you got your own money? She said, absolutely. I always have had, and I've got money stashed away. I use it for parties. I use it for all kinds of things. When the kids need something, he says, all right, well, what about that? She said, I can pay that insurance this month. He said, well, that would be great. See, she said, if you talk to me about your feelings, there's a solution there. He said, all right, yeah, well, maybe I'll talk to you more about my feelings. And they're both laughing at themselves. Here they are, talking about this perpetual issue that they've had now they've been married 25 years, right? And these are the masters, right? And the way they deal with the perpetual issue is just beautiful.
That kind of fighting, where you come to a resolution and you actually understand your partner better. This is something that you two talk about quite a lot. How often are the problems rooted in the past versus the present relationship?
90%, I would say. So part of that exercise that we ask couples to do in order to really understand each other more deeply is a series of questions, as I mentioned, that they ask each other. But listen to these questions. Do you have any values, ethics, or beliefs that are part of your position on this issue? And the second one, is there any childhood history or background history that has formed your position on this issue? Why is this so important to you? What are your feelings about it? Is there an ideal dream that you're hoping for that really relates to your position on this issue? And then the one that sometimes goes the deepest is there an underlying purpose or sense of meaning, life purpose, that's a part of your position on this issue? And that goes, Chris, into this really existential place of why am I alive? Why am I here? Well, if I want to parent my kids without corporal punishment, those kids are my legacy. Those kids will carry on what I've given them when I'm dead and gone. So that's why that position is so important to me. No corporal punishment. You see, so those questions draw out so much deep understanding that the other partners often will just, I had no idea. Really? Oh my God. So
conflict then becomes something entirely different. You can get behind your partner's dream, and you're more willing to work on some kind of an agreement that honors both people's dreams.
Right.
And so conflict becomes an entirely different thing. It's like problem solving together, working out a puzzle together, rather than working against each other, which we think of conflict as this, but we don't think of it as that. And those questions, those 6 questions, are really powerful.
Before I ever met the two of you, my wife and I used a product that you created, this deck of cards, 52 questions to ask before marriage or moving in. This is not a sponsored ad, but I truly, I believe in this so much. I've given those to so many of friends and couples who are moving in or getting married because my wife and I dated for a long time before we got married almost on our 10-year anniversary. And so having been together for a decade, I thought like, surely we have talked about everything. There's not like some sort of new revelation. But these questions that you put together, these are the most common sources of conflict and disagreement in marriage. And what I found is that when Molly and I actually sat down and talked through them, there were so many that we had never had an explicit conversation about. Do you want to send your kids to public or private school? How do you think about what would happen if one of you was incapacitated medically, right? Like, these are really tough questions.
Yeah.
Right. So many people believe in the myth that you have to be compatible in order to have a good relationship, which really has to do with, okay, what things do I think are important? What do I love to do, etc. And it's not really about kind of the content of those discussions. It's more about how do you talk about them.
One of the concepts that you two both became really well known for was this idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in conversations. Can you, for people who aren't familiar, can you just walk us through what those are?
Yeah. So, what we found initially was that there were 4 things, 4 negative things that people did. And these 4 things were the way they started talking about a conflict. The first was criticism, which is stating the problem as a defect in the partner's personality. Our problem is that you're, thoughtless and unkind or something like that. Criticism, that was the first one. Defensiveness, the second one. A normal reaction to criticism, say, counterattacking. You're not so perfect, here's what's wrong with you, or feeling like an innocent victim and whining about it. So criticism, defensiveness. Contempt, which is an escalation of criticism with a tone of superiority, like sarcasm does that. Really an insulting, superior air to the criticism. And finally, stonewalling, which is really emotional withdrawal from the interaction, just, tuning out and not giving the usual signals to a speaker that you're listening and are with the speaker. So those are the 4 things that were the best predictors.
And Julie, can a couple come back from experiencing those?
Sure, of course. First of all, I think most people use those because we're in a very critical culture. Think about it. We go to school at 6 years old, and immediately we're starting to be criticized. Sit down, don't get up. That's not good. You're not doing well enough, etc. We just absorb criticism as a way of communicating, and it always makes somebody defensive, typically, most of the time. So we can come back when we know the alternatives. Nobody takes relationships 101 in high school or college or anywhere else. Most people haven't had the perfect relationship in front of them to role model after, right? Kids are watching parents, typically, who are not doing very well, right? At least half of them are not. So how do you learn how to have good conflict? When people have the alternatives, they grab hold of them like a sponge, soak them up, and then try to practice them. And at first it feels really phony, and just like, oh, this is ridiculous. This isn't me. You're right. It isn't you. And you are destroying the marriage. No, I don't say that. I promise. But anyway, once they have alternatives, they really want to try and use them. And it turns out that when they do, oh my God, everything turns around.
My honest reaction to you naming the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is I wish that my reaction was thinking, oh man, people act like that. But instead, I'm like, I've done that, and I've done that, and I can remember a time when I did that one, and that one.
We all have. Welcome to the human race.
Yeah. And I think this is something that I really have struggled with in my own relationship, is needing to learn how to fight.
Yeah.
Because wanting it to be perfect all the time, but that being unavoidably not possible. And so how do I figure out how to learn how to fight and how to do that?
So relationship skills are the same kind of thing. It's like learning to play an instrument. You have to practice, you have to rehearse, you have to make mistakes and recover from them and so on.
Good point.
It really takes study, to really fight right. And once you fight right, though, conflicts are actually a source of greater intimacy and greater understanding. And you're solving problems together, not against one another.
I think that my wife Molly and I have, over the years, developed a lot of these skills that we're talking about how to fight. And yet, we are in this moment where we have a young kid at home,
Right.
We have another on the way. It's kind of a classic time where there's a lot going on.
Right.
And so I wonder, what do you do when the conflicts are less internal, how you two are relating to each other, and more external, like how do we have enough time to connect?
Right.
How do we have enough money to go on a date night or to not be stressed? How do we have enough sleep so that we can take that second and be our best selves?
When your child is 35, you will be getting enough sleep.
I believe that. If I can survive till my child is 35, I believe I will be a much better partner.
The answer to your question is really so important, because we actually discovered by doing research on people going through the transition from being partners to being parents, almost 2/3 of couples go through a big drop in relationship happiness. Hostility increases in their conflict, and it transfers to the child also, adversely affecting the child's development. So we saw that there were masters who went through this transition smoothly. They actually managed to go through it without the drop in relationship satisfaction. And they did the whole thing entirely differently. And so by studying them and comparing them to the people who really suffered through this transition, we learned how people manage that. How do they manage not having enough money for a date, or not feeling comfortable leaving the baby with a babysitter, or, all of those problems.
So, first of all, it's really important to have what we call a stress-reducing conversation. And, ideally you have that every day, but, who has time? People don't have time. But a stress-reducing conversation is amazing. It deals with external stresses outside the relationship. You talk about your day, and you say to your partner, oh my God, I had such a terrible day. My boss chewed me out. It was awful, in front of everybody. Now, typically, the way that people used to respond to that is, let me fix it for you. Let me solve the problem. Why don't you do this? Wrong. That doesn't work, because it cuts off the emotions. And emotions are where you really build a bond, right? So what the partner needs to do is ask questions to understand the speaker's feelings at a deeper level. So you might ask questions like, what was the worst part about this for you? Do you have a nightmare scenario about what might happen here? Help me understand. I don't quite get that part. And then as the understanding builds with questions, and note, you're showing your interest by asking those questions, then you express empathy. That's all you need to do. Empathy looks like, God, what a bummer. That's terrible. Oh, geez. You don't have to solve the problem. Your partner is usually smart enough to do that, him or herself, right? So it's the empathy and the interest that makes a huge difference. Now, couples who have young kids may end up doing that at, 10 to 10. And by 10 o'clock, it's night, lights out, right? So even a quick one will help, even a quick one. The other thing that you can really do is look for what your partner is doing right and say thank you. Not noting what they've done wrong. You didn't clean off the kitchen counters. Look for what they're doing right. Thanks for doing the dishes. Thanks for making the coffee. Express gratitude, express appreciation every moment you can. That too is building this positive culture of appreciation so that when you do have your blowouts, you've got some good emotional money in the bank that you're drawing from, but there's still some left over. That's
Keep
the point.
the romance going. I mean, make the relationship a priority.
I think naturally, probably people often have a lot of questions for you about how to solve the conflict. But I'm curious about putting that money in the relationship bank.
Another thing you can do is ask your partner questions that are meaningful questions, that are open-ended questions. Like, so, how are you thinking about your career as an academic these days? How are you feeling about the house that we're trying to build right now? How are you thinking about our daughter and how she's doing in school, et cetera? So we would really draw out questions that were timely, but also gave us a road, kind of a road map really, into the internal world of our partner in that moment. So if you think about it, when you're dating, you ask your partner, potential partner, lots of different questions to find out who they are. As soon as you cross the aisle into marriage, boom, that ends. There's no more big questions. Bad idea, because we're not static creatures, right? We're changing all the time. Every single day, we're going through little changes. And over the course of time, we're evolving into almost totally different human beings. So asking questions like you may have asked initially is a wonderful thing to keep doing. But when our daughter was 8 years old and she went to sleepaway camp, we decided to take ourselves to camp. And we went to this really cool hotel on this island and would go there for, 10 days, a week maybe, and we would ask each other these same questions year after year. How did you feel about last year? What was a bummer about last year? What was wonderful about last year? What are you looking forward to? That kind of ritual of connection is something, the small ones that you build into your day are perfect. John is a wonderful cook, so he will make dinner. I'm not bad, but I'm a better cleaner than he is, and now you know why. So, so I'll do the cleaning, right? He does the cooking. And if I cook, he cleans. So, it's this
To her standards.
Most of the time.
Right.
So that kind of almost co-designing parts of your relationship while preserving the spontaneity.
You two also, I've noticed, even just in this conversation, there are these moments of friction that everyone has. And instead of becoming like, I'm upset about that, I'm gonna talk about that later, where you talked when I wanted to talk or you bumped me, you two, maybe even without thinking about it, you give each other a little pat, or you say sorry, or you laugh, you smile. That feels important.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think it is too. It may be just because we've done lots of interviews, and at first, we didn't know who was going to talk, who was going to ask questions, and the reality, Chris, actually, is that this world continues to be very sexist. So what would happen is that John and I would be asked a question that was usually clinical in nature. I would answer it, And then they would turn to John and they would say, well, Dr. Gottman, what do you think? What am I? I'm also Dr. Gottman. And God bless this man. He would say, I think she already answered it. But that was happening constantly. So eventually, he and I developed signals for who would answer what, and little signals if one of us was going on too long, the other one wanted to say something. And so it's this subtle, nonverbal
Right.
form of communication that so far has served us well.
I would imagine that very few couples who are listening or watching have the exact problem of we are both clinical psychologists and we are both PhD psychologists who are interviewed and one of us gets asked more questions. But I think that the underlying piece that often there's like a structural societal prejudice that then plays out in your relationship, whether that is one partner is expected to do more childcare or one partner is not expected to have as rich an intellectual life as another, or they're expected to be one way or the other. Those can often, the external forces can play a really tough role in the internal relationship. So this is a way that you two have navigated that. I wonder if there's a way that you can draw some lessons for other people who are struggling with that.
You know, for a woman to talk to a man about sexism against women, you know, it's sometimes easy, sometimes it's not. Sometimes, you know, the partner, the male partner will really personalize it. You don't like me because I'm a man, you know, etc. And it's really important to make the distinction when you're trying to convey an idea to your partner about what you've gone through, to say, this isn't about you. This isn't about you. Preface it. This is not a criticism of you. I married you because you're an exception. But it's still out there.
When Julie says the 4 dreaded words, we need to talk. I whip out my notebook and I get my pen out and I say, okay, I'm listening. Talk to me. And I write down what she says. And if I'm feeling defensive, I just keep writing. I slow it down so I can write every word. And as I'm writing, I kind of go, oh, that's a good point. Interesting. So I stay calm and less defensive. This is my big invention. And I use it all the time.
You know how many of these he has?
Yeah,
He has like 50 of them, and guess where they are? On top of his
I was going
bureau.
to say, if there's one thing I've learned about John is that from any possible place around you or on your body, you might pull out a book of some kind.
Yeah, you got to be able to
Notebook.
reach the resources that you need.
You've been doing this work for decades. Have there been trends or improvements or changes, positively or negatively, that you've noticed in relationships over the course of your careers?
Well, first of all, one of the biggest ones was COVID, right? So people were struggling with COVID for 2 years, sometimes 3 years. You know, it's still going on now. And what we saw is that the couples who were doing well and then had to quarantine did great. They were just terrific. They had these conversations they usually didn't have time for, and so on. The couples who were not doing well, really, the cracks really opened up into chasms in their relationships, especially if they were contained in a very small space. So I found myself giving people ideas like, you know how your kids built a fort out of sheets and pillows? Do the same thing and go inside that tent in order to have your own separate space. Even though your partner may be in the room, you can't see them, they can't see you. You've got privacy, just a bit. So that was a very, very stressful time, terrible time. And out of that, because all this stuff was happening at the same time, politics became a huge divider. In this country, of course, people have really polarized. And that's one of the big differences. People have polarized to extreme levels. And if they're on opposite sides of the fence, wow, you can have World War III. And we didn't really have that until 2016, right around there, as the political climate changed. So more polarization. And there's this battle right now between, again, women who are wanting to have a more traditional relationship where the roles are very clearly defined. The woman is staying at home, much more than working. And that's a big shift. Didn't have that as much back in the 80s, 90s, fresh out of feminism when women were going back to work. Another big difference, oh God, this is amazing, is that men had affairs, forevermore, since God only knows, 3,000 years ago or more. Women now started to have affairs too. And they also realized that they didn't have to stay in relationships that were abusive,
Right.
that were depriving.
Had their own money.
Right. That were very distressing and unhappy. So they left and changed.
Another thing that's been much more negative is that the sense of me has become much more prominent, that I'm important. I have to love myself. And so a very big reason for divorce now that's really new is this marriage doesn't actualize my growth. So it's much more, in a way, anti-relationship oriented. And we're seeing the effects of that sort of me-centeredness really hurting relationships rather than helping. People now all over the world are more likely to go solo, not even want to get married or have relationships or have children. And that's been a real negative effect. The other thing is, these telephones that everybody has in their hand, that have led people to communicate by texting. And people think that they communicate emotion very clearly in text. And research shows they don't have a clue, how it's taken. And so people are texting and miscommunicating. And, people like Sherry Turkle have been talking about the loss of face-to-face communication skills. The biggest problem in online dating is getting people to actually have a date rather than text, to actually say, let's meet for coffee, or let's go for a walk. So people are kind of avoiding each other, not talking on the telephone, not seeing each other. The electronics has been really widening the gap between people.
Well, Dr. Julie Schwartz-Gottman, Dr. John Gottman, thank you so much for being here on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Great
This
interview.
has really been wonderful.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of How to Be a Better Human. Before you go, please click the like and subscribe button to get alerts on inspiring TED Talks and interviews. You can also head over to TED's own podcast channel, the TED Audio Collective, where we publish even more video podcasts. Thank you so much and hope to see you soon.